Hey everyone, welcome back to the Trendcrusher podcast. I'm Peter K, aka Trendcrusher. This time we're back to the United States and we're exploring a very different sound, a mix of electronica, synthwave with black metal. Yeah, if you've clicked on this episode, you know I spoke to James Lollar, aka GosT. If you weren't aware, GosT has their latest album Prophecy, which is out this weekend. So I got to find out more about the album Prophecy. And before we get into that chat, Indian heavy metal act Kryptos, they've completed 25 years. Their latest album, they've just announced it, Decimator, is going to be out in July. And they've dropped the title track from it. So I thought let's give everyone a taste of it. Here it is. And that was Kryptos with Decimator. Do check out the album when you get a chance. You can pre-order it right now in every possible format, I guess. I've left the link in the show notes. But like I mentioned before I played the track, I got a chance to speak to James Lollar, aka GosT, about their latest album, Prophecy, and here it is. Hi, James. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
So, we're talking approximately a month in advance of the release of your sixth album, Prophecy. So, just to get things warmed up and started, how does it feel to be doing press around a new album?
It feels good. It's been, I think, over 3 years, so it definitely feels good.
Yeah. And just to add some context to it, right? Like the last 3 years have also been really strange times for all of us, irrespective of whether you live in Texas, in Europe, or India, like me. Now, one of the things about the album, there is clearly an apocalyptic kind of theme overarching all of it, right? And I think the press note kind of really sums it up well when it says that it reflects the horror and grim anxieties of a world. And while it says it's all rolled back to the 1950s, while I was listening to the album today while traveling around here in Mumbai, just looking at the sheer amount of people and all of that, it kind of just fits in some really strange way, if I may say so. So I have to ask you, and I was very curious, especially with this album, what came first, the concept or the music for you?
Um, kind of both. So I started writing the record, and it was gonna be more like the previous record. It was gonna be all vocals, but I think I wrote the vocal tracks first, and then decided that I was gonna do a bunch of instrumentals and kind of bring things back to kind of how I used to do them a little bit, with a little bit of a twist on it. And then the concept came in. So kind of before the majority of the album was written, but yeah.
Okay, and kind of take us back to the entire process, right? Because what we hear, and it's interesting that you said dial back, right? Because I've been listening to you for a while now, and I still remember hearing the first track with vocals going, whoa, what's happening here? And there was a complete shift in sound. Would you say, I mean, and again, I'm pretty sure it's not a conscious decision, but do you think this album will be like the middle spot for both your old fans and your recent fans? What do you think about that?
I hope so. That was the goal. I had that in mind for sure during the whole process. I spent the last couple of albums, like you said, changing a lot. And it's strange when you carve out a place musically for people, they don't always like change with you. So I pay attention to that. And I was taking for granted that I had my own thing anyways. I don't have to always be creating a new genre or trying to with GosT. So yeah.
Yeah. And before I go on, right, I must add, for me, that was one of the initial appeals for GosT, right? Honestly, is that while I am a metalhead, I'm not always like 24/7 listening to metal, right? So here's something like which will also feel like metal, but not really metal, if that makes sense. But
Yeah, for sure.
going back to what we were talking earlier, right? Take us through that process, or the listeners also and me to the process of from when you kind of realized, okay, I want to be doing vocal stuff, I want to be doing instrumental stuff, to finally what everyone will finally end up listening on Prophecy, right? Were there multiple iterations? Did you go back and forth? How did you finally come and say that, you know what, this is the GosT sound for Prophecy, if that makes sense?
Let me think. So I started just experimenting on the last couple of records because I was generally just kind of bored of what I'd been doing for, I suppose, 6 years at that point. And I'm kind of I change a lot as a person, anyways. Like I listen to tons of music, and I don't really pigeonhole myself with fashion and stuff like that. I'm always changing, so it's really difficult for me to stay in one lane. So that was just happening naturally, and then with feedback and talking with some close friends about you know bringing the mask back and everything, it just seemed like that was the vibe that everybody was really wanting. And once I had it in my head, it was I couldn't get it out. I wanted to kind of get back into what I had created to begin with, in 2012 or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a couple of directions I can go with what you said, but let's stick with the visual aspect first, right? One of the things also I noticed is the artwork, right? And I'm not going to butcher his name, so I'm just going to say Marald. Uh,
Yeah.
at which point did he get involved in the entire process? Like, did you kind of share a brief with him or some of the songs in the early process? Because my question was going to be how important is the visual aspect for you, but like you've kind of preempted my question, it is a very important part. So like with the mask, with the artwork, how did that entire package, how did you visualize or think about that?
Well, I had like some concept art that was just that I had put together that was just a nuclear explosion. And Moral he's a fan too. He's listened to my music for a long time, and he's kind of asked to work with me a few times, and it just didn't work out. And this time, my manager was like, "Let's use Moral," and I was like, "Yeah." And he listened to the record. He loved it. I showed him the concept work, and he took like a couple of weeks and sent me the sketches back of what you see on the cover now, and he just nailed it.
Yeah, because I feel that one of the things, as someone who's been listening to music for a long time, right? You really get attracted to the visual aspect also. I mean, I still remember going down to CD stores and trying to figure out, first of all, like the black metal font. Is this what it is? What's this band saying? That kind of thing. And especially with, I think, also the death metal, right? Because considering it was just so visceral. And I feel that's something which I was reminded of when I was looking at the artwork itself, right? It, especially if you see most of the artwork right now, and it's strange we're talking about a time where you're seeing bands use AI generated artwork also, right? So clearly, artwork like this kind of stands out. Uh, but I want to dive back again because one of the things is the press note mentioned that this album was actually recorded at the end of 2022, right? Which is still some time ago. Uh, if you could kind of go back to that time, what kind of would you say was the impetus or the kind of drive that you had then that kind of you captured in Prophecy, right? Because if you think about it, a lot of creative work is, if I may use the term or the phrase, capturing that entire moment in time, so to say, right? So, what would you say about Prophecy? Kind of like would describe that time for you, especially?
Um, well, I mean, as you said, things are kind of crazy worldwide right now, but uh, you see, you focus on your what's familiar, your surroundings, and our country politically is just insane right now. And it's strange because if you go out on the street, nobody's fighting each other. There's not these political debates aren't happening in public, but online it just it seems like it's really bad. And we were just coming out of the pandemic, sort of, so I'd been online a lot, and that's just where my head was. I was focusing on all the negative things, and if you do that, it starts to seem overwhelming, like it's the end of the world. So since then, I've stepped back from online and kind of have some perspective. It's just I feel like we're just in these cycles, these vicious cycles as modern civilization. We go through these times where it's like everything sucks, everybody hates each other, and then we have like some growth, and then we go back, and it's just so. I mean, I'm trying to. That's where my head was when I was writing the record, and I'm trying to get some balance with that. And as I get older, realize that it's not all or nothing, and the world's not probably not about to end. And yeah, I mean, that's just. I mean that's just that. I mean that's where my head was. The world seemed really, really bad, as it still does, but I don't really pay attention to it anymore.
Okay, I mean, there's a lot more I want to riff off that what you said, but I think it's a great time to kind of play a song of the album. What would you say was the first song that you kind of put together that helped you kind of realize that, hey, this is what the entire album's going to be, or that kind of set you down the path of the rest of the album? And if you could talk about the song, that'd be great.
I mean, it's Prophecy, the title track. I wrote that first after the vocal tracks, and I mean, that's kind of like it set the stage for how the rest of the record was gonna be written.
Awesome. So if you haven't already heard it, here's Prophecy. All right, that was Prophecy by GosT, and I'm still here with James, the mastermind behind GosT. Going back to what we were talking before we played the track, right? I had a very similar journey in the last couple of years, at least mentally, from what you're talking, right? Where we spent so much time online, considering, and especially here in India, we were not allowed during the pandemic to leave our houses. So you're kind of cooped up in this space, and then all you're seeing is that. And two things I think that I did really smartly was one, stop reading news. So in the last 3 odd years, I haven't read any news except unless necessary. And the second, in the last 6 months, is I actually stopped going on Twitter. And I've realized that just not being on Twitter makes me feel so much better. Uh, is that something similar that you're talking about? I'm just curious.
Yeah, 100%, man. Like Twitter it's always been kind of the weird, stepbrother of all the socials, but it's even before Elon kind of took it over,
Yeah.
it started a dive, dude, and it just seems like a place where people want to go be angry and say crazy, outlandish things that they don't say in the real world. But yeah, I mean, I've been fighting deleting Twitter for the last year or two.
Okay. So fair enough. I know where you're coming from. But something else that you said, and I want to kind of go back to that, is you talked about still listening to music. And whenever I talk to artists, musicians like yourself, I always wonder, right? At which point does it become something that you enjoy listening to, right? I mean, it's like a job, right? If you're doing that every day, then it doesn't become fun. Uh, what's your relationship with contemporary music, or whether it's like anything, whether it's dark wave, synth wave, or even metal? Like, how do you go about? Do you actually listen to any contemporary bands at all?
Yeah,
Anything?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I listen to a lot of newer music. I go through phases, man. I don't really focus on finding new stuff anymore. It just kind of happens. I mean, if I'm online or my friends tell me or show me things. But yeah, I mean, I've been obsessed with that band Street Sex lately.
Oh,
I don't
they're
know if you've
good.
heard of them. It's kind of like a noise band. And I don't know. I listen to a lot of country off and on, old stuff. Like I went through a like George Jones period, like for a month last month, where I was like romanticizing being a whiskey drinking, burned out country singer. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. There hasn't been anything really new lately over the last year or so that I've really been into. There seems to be kind of a vacuum right now for like new uh newer sounding music. I think there's a lot of recycling happening right now, so I'm just waiting to hear the next, like, oh shit, Gen Z made something new. You know what I mean?
So then the natural question for me to ask you, right, is, and this is again based on what you talked about prophecy at the start of our conversation. Do you still kind of listen to any metal or synthwave or even dark synth, whatever you want to call it, to kind of just look for inspiration when it comes to production or sound wise, or it's something that you kind of have stayed away from?
I stay away from it for the most part, but there's that woman from Paris. I think she's from France anyway. Sierra. She just dropped something in Carpenter Brutes on one of the songs. It's dark synthy, and I like that album a lot. I listened to that quite a bit when it came out. And metal, I listen to a lot of metal actually. I definitely go through phases, but throughout the year, I listen to metal off and on every year. I keep thinking I'm going to get too old, but it doesn't. I can't shake it. You know what I mean?
No, it's funny that you say that, right? Because last year was a particularly strange year for me, where I was looking at music that I knew a lot, right? And very familiar sounds. And I know some people will cringe at this, maybe you will, but I actually went back, and my top 5 artists on Spotify was actually Linkin Park, because it was 20 years of Meteor. And it's strange because for me, especially, right? Because it's been 20 years, I went back to thinking of what it was like when I first kind of got into metal and that entire sound and things. And a lot of it felt that I've changed so much, but a lot of it felt like it's very similar, right? I'm still that angsty metalhead, but now I'm slightly older, right? So it's kind of going back to what you said. It's cycles
Yeah.
in there. Okay, so then I must ask you, right? there was this entire synthwave kind of thing that happened over a period, and it wasn't just like 1 2 years, right? There was a good 3 4 years. You had multiple labels spawn off it. How do you look back at that, and what's your kind of reflection on that? Do you still feel that you're part of that scene, or do you identify with it at all?
Yeah, I mean, I still work with a lot of like events that are based around synthwave and darkwave. And I have a lot of friends, that make the music, that put on the events. Yeah, I think I'll always be a part of it. I when I look back, I kind of regret not being like more involved, I guess.
Okay.
I kind of when I was taking it for granted when we were first all kind of doing what we were doing and it was being, noticed by people. I don't know where my head was, but yeah, I just kind of took it for granted that we had this close knit group of people and we had
Yeah.
these like Facebook groups that were dedicated to, all the producers before anybody kind of blew up. So, uh, yeah, I kind of regret just how for granted we took everything. We don't have any of that anymore. There's no real cohesion.
Yeah. And again, I feel this goes back to what I'm saying in terms of cycles, right? New metal towards like the mid 2004 5 became this bad thing, and now you have this entire sound coming back. So for everyone tuned in who has GosT or all the adjacent bands, vinyl or CDs, just hold on to it, I'd say, right? Who knows,
Yeah.
like 10 15 years uh, from now. But okay, since you talked events, this is something I've been wondering about, and especially looking at the entire spectrum of the discography that you have. uh how do you go about kind of deciding a set list for a show? I know that like your live act has completely changed, and I don't know what it's going to be like with Prophecy, but I mean, I was looking at videos of yours where it was just you alone, and then you had like a bass player. Is that something that, how do you kind of go about deciding your set, and does that determine your setup and stuff like that?
I just it depends on the tour. If it's like a support run, I only have like 35, 40 minutes. So I just try to I play newer things, but I try to really pack the set as much as I can with as big of a array of my discography as I can. So like I'm planning some headline runs for this year, so the set's going to be like an hour and 20 minutes. So I've got
Oh,
like a
nice.
lot of room to stick a bunch of music into it. So uh yeah, I mean, it really just depends on how much time I have. That's kind of how I plan it and the mood I'm in. And then, sometimes I plan a set and I start working on it and it doesn't work. So I have to change songs around or whatever. Um, and with the bass player, that was, I wanted to, I was traveling alone too back when you were watching those older videos where I was alone. I was traveling all over Europe just completely alone. It was kind of miserable.
Yeah, I can
So
imagine.
I've got friends that play music that I play with for years, and I want to add a drummer, but it's just a lot more difficult when it comes to travel and costs and everything like that. So,
Yeah.
the guy that's playing bass with me now, his name's Cole. He's actually a really really good guitar player, like far better than me. So having him on bass is kind of an insult, but he's like one of my favorite people, and it really does add to the live sound. It gives it more of a low end, some more balls than it normally would. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the answer to that.
Okay. So since you talked about headlining, is that going to be your setup, or what you got planned for the upcoming tours? I mean, I don't know how much you can talk about it at the moment, so uh, feel free to share how much as you can.
um, so I've got like some one-off shows coming up that'll be headline shows. I'm doing New York City and New Orleans in May, and those are going to be headlines. And I'm going to have like a bigger light show than I've ever had. I'll have the bass player with me. We're talking about working in, some more synthesizers and things for Cole to use during the set. So we'll just see if we have time to squeeze all that in. And as far as like headline tours go, we're working for the fall of this year. We'll see how it goes because everything's kind of packed right now with it's a lot of bands touring. Everything's really busy. So just trying to squeeze it in where we can, you know. I do
Yeah.
have a support run that is like 99% in October in Europe. So
Wow. So you're already like talking fall or towards the end of the year. So you've really got like a lot happening already.
yeah, and we're kind of kicking around the idea of trying to set something up in South America, which I've never done. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. I mean, I always say, and like, especially with, again, in India, we see a lot of like electronica acts and all of them coming in. And typically it's just one person, no, but you'll have more people like in crew and things like that. So it's always like all those other expenses that kind of come in, right? But yeah, sounds quite exciting. And yeah, for all those tuned in, if you're either in North America or Europe, uh, keep an eye out on social media and definitely stay tuned for what GosT is up to, because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And especially just from the mobile videos that I've seen, it's a lot of fun, I'm sure, because it's not just an audience that's coming in because they have to or it's part. Because I think that's the thing with the festival lineups, right? Someone kind of discovers it's people who are coming in because they're actually into the sound.
Yeah, definitely.
But I have to ask you then, since you talked about North America and Europe, how have you seen your sound, at least in recent times, perceived differently in both places, or it doesn't make that much of a difference?
Well, when I first started, and it's probably because the Blood Music was based out of Finland, uh, Europe was way more into what I was doing than the US, but it's switched. So now that it's more popular here, and that could be just all the stylistic changes I went through and the label changes. I don't really know, what contributed to that, but it's not like full tilt, like almost nobody knew me in the US when I started. So it's almost kind of just leveled out a little.
Yeah. I mean, I'm based out of India, and I heard of you actually thanks to Blood Music, right? So
Yeah.
think about that. But okay, just to wrap up our chat, and it's been great kind of talking to you. What else would you like to kind of share or let everyone know about Prophecy once it's out?
I don't know. It's a pretty long album. I wanted it to be longer. There's 3 songs that aren't on it that are probably going to be released later. Yeah, just I don't know. Enjoy it if you do. If you don't, kick it to the curb.
All right. I think that's a great note to wrap up our chat. Thanks so much, James, for taking time out to speak to me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, same, man. Thank you.
Yep, that was GosT with Prophecy, all about it. And I'm really glad I got a chance to speak to him about the album. It's out right now on Metal Blade Records. As always, link in the show notes on how you can get a copy, a physical or digital copy, links to all of it there. Let me know, what do you think of the album? Are you a fan of synthwave? What do you think of the latest sound of GosT on Prophecy and just the evolution of the sound? I'm going to leave a question in Spotify if you're listening on it. Why don't you let me know on that? I've got another episode dropping in another few days. Yeah, it's a pretty exciting one, so that's why 2 episodes in less than a week. To know when it drops, as always, follow me on Instagram or Twitter. Just search for Trendcrusher. And yeah, I'll see you very soon. Cheers.